Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The Viking Portable Libraries World Bible, edited by Robert O. Ballou. And we are starting with, that's the picture, the Muslim, and the Moslem is probably how some people are going to pronounce this, but it's Muslim. There's no God but Allah. Death is ever threatening and often shows. Death is ever threatening and often slow and painful in the Arabian desert. It waits quietly in the singing red sands which stretch for many miles between oases. It flies on the wings of whirling sandstorms. It glints in the sunlight from the curved sword blades of hostile tribesmen. The weak are obliterated by the sun and the sands and the dryness, and in the hour of the parched lip and an arid tongue, on who is there a call for comfort and aid? In the wide, unpeopled stretches of wasteland, private ownership is an abstraction. An object belongs to him who has it and can hold it, or to him who can take it. With who or what power is there to deny this? If a man withholds his hand from murder and pillage of a weak traveler, or even shares his handful of dates and his precious skin of fetid water with the less fortunate one, it is the result of no religious compulsion. Rather, it arises from a sense of family pride, or perhaps from the realization that the giver of bounty today may be the pleader of his life tomorrow. Or so it was in the 6th century AD. I hate calling it AD, so I'm going to replace all those with CE for Common Era from now on. Yet, for all that desert waste, so sparingly in material fertility, have always been fertile in the spawning of religion, as India, Persia, Palestine bear witness, and the desert land of Arabia is no exception. Now, that's a savage philosopher idea. That doesn't quite prove true. Polytheism in particular flourishes in new forms when you don't live in a desert, when there's all sorts of different plants and different types and different hills and different terrains, but when it's more or less the same looking, no. During the first half millennium of our era, when Christianity was establishing itself firmly in Europe and Zoroastrianism, having been stopped in its onward march by the Greek victory at Salamis, was deteriorating in Persia, because they made it too complex of a faith for people to follow, and a tribal one at that. When in China, Confucius and Lao Tzu had become venerated, Lao Tzu had become venerated saints of the distant past, and Buddhism had spread far eastward in the land of its origin, from the land of its origin. The vast majority of the Semitic Arabian people still express their dim religious consciousness in the primitive, unorganized polytheism. No, I thought that was part of the problem of some of it, is it was so intensely organized that you needed priesthood to work it all out, the 360 and all, and gods of this, that, and the other, the valleys, and, you needed an expert to tell you, what to worship and how to worship, if that was your belief. In the theology of the Arabs, there was a god for every spot, a deity who symbolized the state of union which existed between every living man and his ancestors. Above all of these minor gods, there was one higher god, Allah, whose sons and daughters the tribal deities were. Feasts and ceremonies paid tribute to the tribal gods, but Allah was ignored in these propitiations. Holy oaths were sworn and documents sealed in his name, but beyond this recognition of his existence, he seems to have had little pertinence to the life of the average Arab. In the conception and name of Allah, the Arabians were but carrying on a primitive vision of God and a word which existed before the beginning of their recorded history, one which fathered the conception of Jehovah as well as Allah, as that of Allah. just as a common ancestry of the Indians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and others may be traced through language and common theologies to the Indo-European race, so has language research established knowledge of a common Semitic race which, before recorded history, scattered into Southern or Arabic, Northern or Aramaic, and Middle or Hebrew branches. Now, it wasn't called Hebrew back then, it was all Aramaic, but, Among the deities common to all these peoples was El, which meant strong. Strong leader. In early Hebrew, it occurs to mean strong, hero, and god. In Babylonian inscriptions, the same designation occurs as Ilu, meaning god. In Arabic, Ilah, standing alone, means any god, or anything that's treated as a god. Combined with an article, Al-Ilah, it becomes, through shortening, Allah, the far and distant god, whose sons and daughters were worshipped by the Arabian tribes. Well, people believed that, and they worship things real or imaginary as a god, but Allah is the Arabic singular and definitive for God. But there were influences modifying the ancient religion during these centuries in Arabia. To the east, across the Persian Gulf, lay Iran, the home of Zoroastrianism. To the north were Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, bordered by the Euphrates River, over which Abraham had led his people. In the great cities of Arabia, centers of trade and intellectual firmament, were many Jews and Christians living in close association with the Arabs. By the middle of the 6th century AD, the influence of Greece and Persia had spread throughout the land and breadth of the Arabian Peninsula. There was not a single independent Arabian state of any size or importance. Yet, the religions of these mixed peoples from abroad, as professed and practiced in Arabia, had sunk to a low level. Arabian Christianity had become a shapeless mass of dogma. Arabian Judaism had become almost idolatry, in which Ezra, the scribe who was believed to have written the Torah, was worshipped as a god. And among the Arabians, even the old polytheistic religion had fallen so low that the tribal gods were neglected and often openly mocked. And by dogma, they mean that there was conservative forms of the faith, and that was basically it. Catholic, Coptic, the Ethiopian church, the Syrian church. There was, remnants of that in the Arabian Peninsula. But it was an age where people, if they believed this was the word of God, such and such was God's scripture, they would follow God's scripture. Instead of, you just got to stick to the Jesus thing and you're okay. It's like, no. What type of Christian is that? Arabian Judaism had become almost idolatry, in which Ezra, the scribe, was believed to have written the Torah, was worshipped as a god. And among the Arabians, even as the old polytheistic religion had fallen so low that the tribal gods were neglected and often openly mocked, into this land of mixed and demeaning religious life was born Muhammad in Mecca about CE 570. His father, Abdallah, died before his birth, and his mother when he was a child. After their deaths, he was cared for first by his grandfather and later by his maternal uncle Abu Talib. And he was kindly treated, but as part of a large and poor family, suffered the privations which were the lot of his cousins. He had no formal education, and as a youth, he had learned to know the hardships of desert life through herding sheep. Max Mueller, The Science of Religion, is one of the sources in putting this together. When he was 25, he entered the service of a rich widow, Khadijah, and became for her a camel driver and a conductor of caravans between Damascus and Jerusalem. Later he married Khadijah, though she was 15 years his senior, and seems to have found in her a rare measure of support and comfort inspiration during the years of bitter emotional conflicts and persecution which began during the period of his awakening religious consciousness and ended only when he was past 50. After his marriage, when he came into contact through his wife's cousin Waraka with a small group of thoughtful persons who called themselves Hanifs or penitents. These, strongly under the influence of the Jews, early Christians and Essenes of Arabia, and familiar with the Greek, Syriac, and Abyssinian churches, believed in asceticism, meditation, and consecration of life in preparation for the Day of Judgment. They denied the existence of the many tribal gods and proclaimed that salvation could be achieved by man only through Islam or submission to the will of the one God, Allah. Man must return, they said, to the original Semitic religion of Abraham, the real fountainhead of both Judaism and Christianity. Now, they weren't really a sect. They were, the truth seekers. They were sort of independent, unorganized religion, as it would be called. Profoundly impressed, Muhammad frequently withdrew for long periods of meditation, fasting, and prayer to a cave on a lonely slope of the bare and desolate Mount Hira. Parn is the biblical name for it. Weakened by loss of food and the emotional storm which surged within him, he sometimes had physical seizures in which he saw visions and occasionally lost consciousness. Now that's twisting the story. He went into trance, but there's a huge difference between a trance and epilepsy. During one of these seizures, in the month of Ramadan, the angel Gabriel appeared to him holding a scroll, saying that on it was written a passage from the heavenly book, and although Muhammad was unable to read or write, the angel commanded him to read what was written thereon. Later, this passage became Surah 96 of the Quran. Actually, the first 5 verses of that. Its words were, "Read, in the name of thy Lord who created man from clots of blood. Read, for thy Lord is most beneficent, who hath taught the use of the pen, hath taught man what he knew not. Nay, verily, man is most extravagant in wickedness, because he seeth himself possessed of wealth. Verily, unto the Lord is the return of all." Rushing home in a frenzy of excitement, Muhammad told Khadijah of his experience, which greatly troubled him. Had his vision been authentic? And if so, what did it mean? Khadijah urged him to believe the evidence of his senses and accept it as a command from Allah to prophesy and become the voice through which God could speak to mankind. Yet in spite of his faithful wife's assurance, Muhammad continued to doubt and sometimes even contemplated suicide in the agony of his soul. Well, not as a result of that, no. He was upset about, the state of his people, the station of his people. But after 2 or 3 years of this conflict, the angel Gabriel appeared to him a second time with a second revelation, and after this there were no doubts in Muhammad's mind. He confidently went forward on his mission as revelation after revelation came to him. He began by gaining followers within his own household, and then among his friends, and soon a small community was formed, professing Hanif beliefs and following Hanif practices under the leadership of Muhammad. Thus, he did not found an original revelation, nor attempt, as Zoroaster, Gautama, and Jesus, to reform an old. Rather, he set himself the task of spreading the doctrines of the Hanifs, which he and they constituted the one true creed, the ancient religion of Abraham. That's a confusing way to give you with a large, he's not trying to find a new religion, but or reform an old one. He's trying to spread this one. It's like, well, Islam is the faith of all the prophets. One of the members of the group gave Muhammad a house to use as a meeting place, and here he preached and gained a few converts. But his influence at first was not great or widely spread. He had nothing to say which was new to his auditors. He at first delivered impersonal revelations in which he proclaimed a viral monotheism dominated by the one God who required self-surrender and unconditional obedience, prayers, almsgiving, and temperance. But these were principles which the Hanifs had long held. All which Muhammad brought to old beliefs was his individual enthusiasm and the emotional intensity of his religious passion. And there were many who looked upon him with deep disfavor and criticized him openly because he drew so many of his supporters from the poor, the slave caste, and the young. Embittered by open criticism and lack of public support, his preaching became more personal and was filled with imprecations. His revelations now began to threaten infidels, misbelievers, as those who did not believe in him, as the prophet of God, with the vengeance of Allah. The importance of moral behavior was submerged by the importance of believing in Muhammad and the Allah whom he preached. No, that was never the Islamic message that, yes, it's important the prophet, but the prophets bring the news. And what is the news? But monotheism comes first, obviously. Allah whom he preached, whom he proclaimed. Going further, he attacked the worship of the old tribal gods and incurred the anger of the powerful Meccans. A troop of these went to Muhammad's uncle, Abu Talib, and asked him either to persuade the Prophet to desist from his insulting heresies or to withdraw his protection so that they could use their own methods of persuasion. At first, Abu refused, but when they returned, accompanying their request with threats, he called his nephew to him and asked him to stop preaching before he involved them both in ruin. But Muhammad, weeping, replied, "Though they gave me the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left to turn me from my undertaking, yet would I not pause until I saw the victory of the Lord's cause, or till I died for it." Yes, Lord is something that we say, but we focus on saying God. We don't use euthanizations like that, or till I die for it. Stirred by this reply, Abu thought he was not one of his, though he was not one of his nephew's followers, said, "Go in peace, son of my brother, and say what thou wilt, for by God I will on no condition abandon thee." Continuing his preaching in Mecca, Muhammad suffered almost daily insults because of his uncle's protection. He was not subject to actual violence, though some of his followers were cruelly treated, and a number of them fled to Abyssinia, where among the Abyssinian creatures they found a friendly welcome and sympathy. And of course, there were various martyrs after that point. An attempt to heal the breach with his fellow Meccans, Muhammad now modified his preaching somewhat. No. One occasion, he even renounced his emphasis on monotheism and delivered a revelation in which appeared a doctrine giving slight recognition to some tribal gods and goddesses of the Arabs. Now, if you read Surah 53, the renouncing of God having daughters and female divinities, and the idea that there aren't female divinities, and how exalted God is compared to... No, it condemns them outright. In a magnificent sort of way. People yelled out and tried to, were interrupting. That's really twisting the story. You got to pretend, these things that the people yelled out, that nobody felt, that wasn't Quran, and he didn't say it wasn't coming from Muhammad, but we're going to act like it did. No, everybody know. Alat, Manat, Uzzah, Surprised and delighted, those of his audience who were not Hanif smiled and nodded in approval, and at the end of the discourse, the Prophet called upon all his listeners to bow down to Allah. The outsiders courteously and graciously bowed down with the rest. Obviously, in this one session, Muhammad had gone far towards overcoming Meccan enmity, but that night, in a vision, he saw the angel Gabriel who charged him with having spoken words which came not from God, but from the devil. Told him, there's people writing this down, investigate, that was the situation. And remorse, Muhammad recalled his words, revising them so that the tribal gods were discredited, and that his persecution began afresh with greater fury than ever. Now, if you look at it linguistically and meaning-wise, the extra verses can't possibly be part of the Quran. You don't even need to see the rest of the story. Fresh with greater fury than ever. Shortly after this, in CE 620, both his faithful wife Khadijah and his uncle Abu Talib died, short of protection now, and divested of the support and encouragement with which his wife had upheld him during all the years of his ministry. The Prophet declared that his case in Mecca was hopeless. Going northwards to Taif, he asked the head of the town to furnish him with protection while he preached, but his request was refused, and a mob drove him violently out of the city. However, Medina, further to the north, was more receptive. A group there, Muhammad learned, were seeking a new religion and hoping for the coming of an Arabian Messiah. About a year after the Prophet fled the mob at Taif, he met with 12 citizens of Medina who made a sixfold pledge to have no God but Allah, and to withhold their hands from all which was not their own, to abstain from fornication, all extramarital sex acts, not to kill newborn infants, to shun slander, and to obey Muhammad so long as his demands upon them were not unreasonable. These returned to Medina, began to solicit support for him, and when it seemed sufficient to ensure success, in the year 622, the Meccan faithful made a secret exodus to Medina and were followed by the Prophet himself. Thus occurred the Hijra, and thus was established the year Al-Hijra, more properly, which marks the beginning of the Muhammadan era in the Moslem calendar, as the birth of Jesus marks the beginning of the Christian era. In Medina, Muhammad and the Muslimun, those who submit, were quickly successful. Muhammad became not only a religious leader, but a ruler for his followers. Arabs could be swung on an idea as on a cord, wrote T.E. Lawrence. And the idea which Muhammad brought to them was nothing less than the world domination for the religion of Allah, and to be brought about through unity and fanatic steadfastness of his worshippers. Obeying God is not fanaticism. Fanaticism is worshiping other than God, instead of following the principles or taking the example or, the temple instead of, the sacredness of the temple by using it. But the Prophet himself lived for only 10 years after the Hijra. During this time, he took 11 wives. Though he had proclaimed a limit of 4 for each of his followers, his own violation of the rule he justified by special revelations which permitted to the prophets to take more wives than the people were allowed. The Bible actually has this too. Biblical marriage is a man and up to 1,000 women, with or without their permission, but Islam requires permission of the women. During his reign in Medina, it became more of a reign than a ministry. He also changed from Jerusalem to Mecca, the direction towards which the worshippers faced when they prayed. Muhammad's indoctrination was thorough in respect to the duty of spreading the religion of Islam throughout the world. Converts were made to be made peacefully if possible, but by the means of the sword if necessary. And remember the Islamic teaching that it is said that Muhammad said that Allah said that Allah's curse is upon those who fight to force conversion. And you find the Quran backing up that condemnation of such practice. After his death, a succession of caliphs, or successors to the Prophet, carried on the work of the law-giving and bloody proselytizing with amazing speed. Islamic rule did allow people to be exposed to Islam, and many people accepted it. It took a long time for certain areas to become Muslim majorities, Had they been forcing the religion, you think it would have happened sooner, maybe? During the life of the first of them, the conquest of Islam extended over Palestine, Egypt, and Persia. Within less than a century, the religion had been forcibly extended throughout North Africa and southwest Spain, eastward to the borders of India and into Turkestan and even into France. In 732 CE, exactly a century after the death of the prophet, a powerful Saracen army carrying the green banner and wielding the curved sword of Islam stood at Tours, within striking distance of Paris, once again, as at Salamis in 480 BCE. The future religion of Europe was to be decided through ordeal by battle. The defeated leaders of the southern Gaul seemed hopelessly outnumbered, but suddenly out of the north, at the head of a stouted army of Franks, came Charles Martel. That means CE, don't I? His grandson, born 12 years later, was to be called Charlemagne, put the invader to rout, and the European Christians were saved from ruthless extermination, which must have preceded the establishment of Islam on the continent. And the examples of the prophet were the green, black, and white flag, without any religious sayings on it. Muslim conquest did not cease with this defeat. Later, Mohammedanism penetrated India, where it became a strong rival of Hinduism, China, and the islands of the Pacific. The number of its followers has constantly increased until today, about 240 million. The CIA says 2.2 billion, the FBI and some other organizations put that as the current number, but actual Muslims is probably at least 250,000 less. Compromising about a sixth of the world's total population are Muslims. The basic sacred book of Islam is the Quran. This is believed to be the divine law of God as uttered by Allah himself in revelations to Muhammad and passed on by the Prophet through the word of mouth. Muhammad's actual inspirations for the words of the sacred book seem to have been the traditions and folklore of the Arabs, Zoroastrian beliefs, example, the devil, the angels, the unfallen angels, Judgment Day, and the resurrection, the Old Testament and the teachings of the Jews with whom he came into contact, and the New Testament and the teachings of the early Christians. And you would think it would pick up some of the contradictions, errors, but no, that theory does not clash. The book consists of 114 chapters, or surahs, the actual plural, which make its volume less than that of the New Testament, and about a fourth of that of the Old. Every surah, save one, begins with the words, "In the name of Allah, the Compassionate, the Merciful." The authority of the Quran is believed to be, by good Muslimin, to be absolute. It is, without any question, the most influential and the most widely read book in all Arabic literature, and probably the most faithfully read scripture in the world. And it is the chief textbook of the modern Mohammedan University of Al-Azhar at Cairo. Its theology and ethical code are simply stated: Allah is the one God who is the primary principle in the universe. He is all-seeing, all-hearing, all-speaking, all-knowing, all-willing, all-powerful. Those whom Allah loves are those who do good, those who believe in and follow the principles of Muhammad, those who are not braggarts, and those who fight in his cause. He punishes the wicked in a fiery hell, in which they shall broil, rewards the faithful in a very material paradise by wedding them to large-eyed maidens and giving them all manner of sensual delights. Robert Ernest Hume, in The World's Living Religions, lists 6 beliefs and 5 duties of the good Muslim. The beliefs are in the one God, Allah, and as angels who intercede with the law for the forgiveness of the faithful. And in the Quran, you don't pray to the angels like in some other groups. In the Quran, as the last of the sacred books, which also include not the Jewish Torah, but the Torah of Moses, and Psalms, the words of Jesus, the actual words of Jesus, belief in the prophets of Allah, of whom 28 are mentioned in the Quran, including Adam, Enoch, Methuselah, Noah, Abraham, Lot, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, Solomon, Zechariah, John the Baptist, Jesus, Alexander the Great is not mentioned in the Quran, and Muhammad, the last and the greatest. Again, the Quran does not make that point. He's just the last. God knows best. In the final judgment, with vividly described rewards and punishments that follow it, and in the divine decree of Allah, the 5 duties are to repeat every day in Arabic, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet, his exemplar prophet and servant, actually. To pray at least 3 times a day, at daybreak, at noon, and at night. Well, that's the traveling. The evening prayer, the dusk prayer, the dawn prayer, the early afternoon prayer, and the late afternoon prayer. 3 times a day, at daybreak, at noon, and at night. With the face turned towards Mecca, or, as best as you can. To give alms, to fast during the month of Ramadan. Ramadan is the name of this month. Month number 9. And it's the 24th, isn't it? And to make at least 1 pilgrimage to Mecca during a lifetime. While Muhammad lived, the law of the Muslims was administered by him, using his authority the words of the Quran. When there were none which precisely fit the case in hand, he received special revelations to guide him. After his death, the Quran, which was first recorded from memory during the years immediately following his death, during his life, there were in history about 500 Quran compilations after his death, but there was a few during his life. And carbon dating backs it up. The British Museum has proven that. Continued to be the basic law, when its words were not specifically applicable, the memories of the companions of Muhammad, those who had known him, were depended upon to tell what the Prophet said in similar circumstances. After their death, the memories of those who had known these companions were drawn upon. So Sahaba, Tabi'in, I forget how to say it at the moment. During the 9th century, Al-Baqir made a collection of about 700,000 traditions in the Sahih, which were used as guidance.